There's a cheat code here. There really is a cheat code. And the cheat code is ask for feedback. I mean, truly ask for feedback. The number of leaders that actually do that in a meaningful way is very few proportionally of all the people that I've ever worked with.
Wow.
They expect the natural forces of performance feedback and that kind of cyclical stuff is enough. And it's not. Every day we are creating impacts of the people that we work with. We're saying some things and sometimes it lands and sometimes it doesn't. Do you really need to know all that stuff? Yeah, only if you want to build alignment, which I say sarcastically. Of course you want to know how your actions are impacting others.
Hi, I'm Jana Devan. I'm the producer here at Stepwise and the owner of the marketing firm Zetist. Today, we're here to talk about something that doesn't get enough airtime in leadership conversations: loneliness. Half of all CEOs report feeling lonely in their role. 61% say it actively gets in the way of their performance. And here's the thing that should stop you in your tracks: the people we expect to have it the most together are often the most isolated. I sat down with Dr. Foster Mobley, the man behind this podcast, to talk about why loneliness is one of the dirty little secrets of leadership, what it cost him personally, and what actually helps. We get into the difference between being around people and actually feeling seen, why ego and identity are more tangled than most leaders want to admit, and what it looks like to finally do something about it. If you've ever sat in an organization and thought, who do I talk to? This one's for you. Let's go. The research that I was reading said that half of all CEOs feel lonely in their role. 61% say it actively gets in the way of their performance. And I want to start there.
The dirty little secret about executive coaching is that many times our subject is loneliness.
Interesting.
And CEOs, male and female, will say it a little differently. They won't say, gee, I'm lonely. What they'll say is, if they are so bold, they will say, it's lonely in this job. Because everyone that comes through the door has an agenda. They want something from me. At no point in my work life do I have the opportunity to let down my hair, try out some new ideas, wildly speculate on things, and have it safe. Know that it's not going to go outside this room, but and sometimes to vent. And again, the dirty little secret is that for executive coaches, that's an important part of our jobs, to be that safe place.
Tell me more about that. How do you accomplish something like that?
I am a very powerful advocate for the leader that I'm working with. I want nothing more than them to be wildly successful. Now, that said, I don't know what that wild success looks like or feels like to them. So therefore, I'm not pushing my agenda. I ask them a lot of questions. I sit and listen very deeply and very powerfully. I give them honor and respect through those processes, again, without an agenda. And that's a very powerful place to have a relationship. High trust, high integrity, high mutual respect, high safety.
Yeah. Well, you've been doing this for 45 years, building businesses, coaching executives. When did you first feel loneliness?
What a brilliant question. There's a level at which I've always had this sense of question about certain of my relationships. And when I looked up the definition of loneliness, it says the subjective feeling that your relationships are not as meaningful, close, or as supportive as you want.
Yes.
Not being around people because I've always been around people. I think I've always had that feeling at times. It's interesting. It's a double-edged sword kind of. There have been some things in me, certain anxieties and insecurities in me that have really kept me back from being very open to a deep relationship, very guarded, very protective. It has to look a certain way. And I had an image to uphold and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, that really kept me back from honest, vulnerable, candid, deep relationships with a lot of people, especially in the workplace. So that's that. It's definitely self-reinforcing, because then that holds me back, and then you feel more isolated or more lonely. It's taken a lot of work to get to the point of having the kind of ego strength needed to have relationships without that big boulder in the middle of them called worry about how they're going to perceive me, worry about my image, worry about my brand. It's taken a lot to get there. It's taken a lot of years. We always say on the Stepwise podcast, we always say, can wisdom be accelerated? Sure. Well, there's certain parts for me that were definitely not accelerated. It just took its time.
Yeah.
And life had to go, and I had to get knocked around a little bit, and I had to succeed, and I had to try new things and fail and succeed and all that stuff. And then finally got to the point of humility in life where I could let down some of those pretenses and then finally begin to separate ego from identity. And for me, that was huge. And it's still a part.
Do you feel like there was a moment where you noticed that shift able to happen in yourself, or was it more gradual and you can kind of connect the dots now that you see them?
There was a very clear moment, and I talk about this in the book Leadership, where I was dealing with an issue with my son, and it was a huge moment of humility for me. The message I took was, how can I be a leader or teacher to others if I can't be a leader in my own family, if I can't be a guide, if I can't? So that was a real big moment that began to knock down an inflated ego that way. And then the rest of it, the development happened much more slowly, and it really had to do with my identity change as a result of me transitioning out of the CEO role of this company that I had founded. And by that time, it had been 35 years. So that was kind of ingrained. I saw myself in a particular light. And then beginning to step out of that really forces that recognition, that look at who I am that's different than my current identity. And getting all wrapped up in that. And that took, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and a slow, gradual process to the point where I feel I'm in a much better place today with regard to that.
Yeah, it seems like something you might not be able to really see in yourself until you're through it.
I think so. There's something that I want to mention. A book that really hit home for me is a book called Mattering by Jennifer Breheny Wallace. She makes incredible points about kind of how important it is that we are seen and that we are acknowledged and that we are valued. Not because our egos are so fragile, but because that's kind of a core part of the need, the psychology of all of us. And by the way, Jennifer, if I can get you on Stepwise, I'd love to have you and have this conversation. I'm going to quote from her book. So the deep sense of crisis we are feeling globally, marked by rising rates of depression, loneliness, and burnout, has been blamed on many factors such as polarized politics, rapid technological advances, social media, and culture wars. Caregivers are overwhelmed by the mental and emotional labor of holding their families together, often while working full-time. Men are no longer sure how they fit into society. Workplaces are more demanding than ever and less fulfilling. And on top of that, AI is now coming for our jobs. Our faith in government institutions has eroded, so we don't believe that any relief or remedy is on the way. Many people have turned away from religion and the community it offers. Technology has eliminated in-person interaction, third spaces have disappeared, and trust in our neighbors has crumbled. And here's her conclusion. The widespread struggles and the effects they've had on all of us, from isolation to exhaustion to a persistent sense of instability, can also be understood as symptoms of not feeling seen, not feeling valued, and not feeling essential. Wow. And I thought that was brilliant. Wow. I just thought that was brilliant. One of the more insightful things I've read in a while.
And you've talked about that a lot in the past few seasons about the trust we don't have anymore in institutions, the lack of third spaces, all of that stuff.
In our little town of Bozeman, a new co-working space just opened. And people who opted out of the corporate world or were solopreneurs or entrepreneurs or whatever are flooding to that place for any sense of connectedness and community. It is surprising. Not that people are using, quote, an office, but they're using that as their kind of social lubricant now.
Yeah.
Which makes total sense to me. And so on the one hand, we opted out of the whole corporate thing, and I don't want to, I want to work virtually, blah, blah, blah. And so the pendulum swung that way, especially during the pandemic. So digitally enabled isolationism by choice. And now it's starting to swing the other way, saying, that work at home, that was kind of okay. And I could take my dog for a walk whenever I wanted to, but man, I miss a little bit of this from time to time, and Zoom just doesn't get it. So we are social beings. There's a wonderful book called The Social Animal by one of my favorite authors, David Brooks, and it's highly recommended for anybody who wants more detail in this stuff. David Brooks, if you're listening, by the way, I'd love to have you on this podcast.
Keep that up. Yeah, I mean, we're not the only social animals either. I mean, you can see loneliness in the animal kingdom if you look through it, and the way we grieve and the way we need connection with each other. It's not something that we just think we have to have, that we just think we should connect with someone, but loneliness has a real impact on everything mentally, physically, in every part of our body too. So it's just such a hard thing to wrap around. That's why Vivek Murthy, the former Surgeon General, talks about how it's a public health crisis, because to solve the loneliness would be to solve a lot of other problems that are coming along with that.
Well, let's deal with a $64 million question kind of sitting in front of us. Why should a leader worry about loneliness in others? Meaning, look, I can hear the argument. It probably hasn't been made to me too. Look, I'm not a sociologist. I didn't go to school to study sociology. I studied spreadsheets. I studied scaling organization. I studied finance. I studied technology. I did not study sociology. Why should I worry about this? To me, there are two answers. One is, first, if you are familiar with the data about presenteeism, about sustainability, about performance, then loneliness is in your people, which many, many, many of us have, and it's not an illness, it's a condition of today's society. You need to be attentive to that. Two, how does this affect how I lead? Here's what it means. It doesn't mean you need a personality transplant. It means pause for a moment longer when you ask a question about how somebody is. Really deeply understand and listen and hear them and see them, may be demonstrated by asking the second question as opposed to, well, my weekend was. Hey, how was your weekend? Oh, it was great. Well, my weekend was. If you can pause a minute and simply say, tell me more about that. What's going on? Hey, how was that? I've never done that. I look forward to, and give people that present connection. You'll go a long way to helping people feel seen and therefore feel valued. And that's really, to me, what all this is about.
And you're talking about the research on presenteeism and everything. Is there anything you could share about that for those of us who haven't?
No, honestly, I threw out the term because it's kicked around a lot. And I've done very little research. I look at the opposite of it. Absenteeism, turnover, burnout, all of those things when people are not seen. Mm-hmm. And so I just figured presenteeism was the opposite of that.
Well, perfect. It worked for me.
I don't know. I get to make stuff up,
It's so great. There's a framing that kept coming back in the research that leadership loneliness isn't a personal failing, it's more structural. The higher you go, the fewer people can be honest with you. And it's just how the structure, especially when your executive comes around. But I've also seen people on Reddit reading loneliness threads saying they felt similar things coming from college into an office and feeling like, who do I trust? I don't have like the network that everyone else has. Do you think most leaders understand that it's a structural problem, or they just feel something's wrong with them?
It's the better ones do. The better ones recognize how important that deep connectedness is. They get out of their office, they open their doors, they walk through the halls, they talk to people, they engage. Now recognize, somebody on a floor in a ward on a factory floor isn't going to come up to you and say in a deep way, gee, my wife is struggling with this. What do you got? What do we, how can we do it? How is this affected? You're not going to have that the nature. But the better CEOs I know create connections. We will talk about this in the next book, but things like reverse mentoring, where you find somebody in the organization who is levels below you, who's willing to tell you the truth, and ask them to tell you the truth. Make it a very safe, great environment. You're going to learn so much. You will be more connected. You will, your place will not be questioned. But they have to go out of their way to create these levels of connection that are different than, people have this image of, I hate the term, ivory tower. But, people have the image of sitting in an office and people having to come in one direction. And I think that gets blown up. I think that doesn't work.
Yeah, to me, it seemed like something that happens at every level, but maybe is the most magnified when you're all the way at the top of something. But, you switch from being a marketing assistant in the beginning of your career to being the marketing manager. All of a sudden you're managing the team that you learned with and you were best friends with and all of that. And the structure of your relationship changes. That's a very lonely place to be. And then maybe when these sort of opportunities keep coming to you, you feel that a little bit each time. Is there any advice for, even if you're in the beginning of your career and, maybe you want to be the CEO, you want to be the CMO or whatever position you're striving to be in, like you're going to feel this more than once. So is there any advice there that you have?
Yeah, and I mentioned this on the podcast with Tim Baldwin, Mountain Mule, and I was listening to yesterday. There's a cheat code here. There really is a cheat code. And the cheat code is ask for feedback. I mean, truly ask for feedback. The number of leaders that actually do that in a meaningful way is very few proportionally of all the people that I've ever worked with.
Wow.
They expect the natural forces of performance feedback and that kind of cyclical stuff is enough. And it's not. Every day we are creating impacts of the people that we work with. We're saying some things and sometimes it lands and sometimes it doesn't. Do you really need to know all that stuff? Yeah, only if you want to build alignment, which I say sarcastically. Of course you want to know how your actions are impacting others. So the cheat code is ask for it and routinely do so. Don't do it at the end of a meeting. Hey, how did I do leading this meeting? No, what am I doing that's, with all your direct reports, actually 2 downs or 3 downs? The better leaders I've ever seen do a fabulous job about soliciting and ingesting the information they get from others on their impact. And then they are able to have a more real conversation with those people all around us about what they are feeling and what they are thinking. And it's a much more honest conversation based on my willingness to be vulnerable and ask for it.
Do you have any stories of someone who does that really well that you can share?
We'll be right back.
This Stepwise episode is proudly sponsored by Mountain Mule. Our goal is to make sure your experience in Montana is unlike anything else. At Mountain Mule, we provide private chauffeur service and Yellowstone National Park tours. Whether you're traveling to or from Bozeman, have a private event, or want a once-in-a-lifetime tour experience, we'd love to get you there. Book at mountain-mule.com and use code STEPWISE.
Yeah, I think I told this in the first book too. My wife, Kathy, went to work for a company, and she was hired in part to design employee indoctrination meetings or their onboarding. In the first 90 days, all employees of this, and they called them teammates, all employees of this very large organization had to go through this thing, and it was 2.5 days, and it was a lot of fun, but very informative, and the key leaders would come in every single time and give whatever. Kathy, for this, reported to the CEO of this very large organization. And so the very first one happens, and there's 300 people in the audience, and the CEO comes in for his piece, and then he and Kathy walk off the stage, and they're just getting to know each other. And he says, so, give me feedback. And what does a new employee do? She said, you're great. And he stopped right then, and in a kind but very clear way said, look, you're very smart. I didn't hire you to tell me what I do well. I hired you to help me get better. Now what did you see, and how can I get better? And she goes, okay, I'm a New Yorker. Game on. And she gave it to him. And they did 51 more of those 300-person things over the course of 4 years. And every single time coming off the stage, he asked and insisted on honesty with her answer.
50
every
times.
Single time. Yes.
Wow.
You would never end a meeting with him where he didn't ask for feedback, and he would take notes and follow up. And you say, you said this, but you didn't do this, and follow up. And within 24 hours, that person would have an answer. We fear information coming this way sometimes. We're used to, we talk about energy out and power over. We're used to energy out as executives. We think we've got to give all the answers. We've got to give all the narrative and all the communications and stuff. When reality says it is bi-directional information that really is going to make us powerful performers.
That sounds like advice that would be beautiful for someone starting their career too. Hey, what can I do better? I mean, I think we're all so afraid to ask that because what if everything we're doing needs to improve? And you know what? What if it does? Then at least you have the information that it does, and you can take steps in that way.
Go one step further, every relationship.
Yeah.
Every relationship between two people or two or more people characterized by information being shared, and then all of us making up our own stuff about it because we all come from different perspectives. Well, let's find out what we're making up about it and clean it up. I had a conversation with a very dear friend last night, and it turned political, and I have avoided political conversations with him for the last 3 years, and but a very good one. And I checked in with him this morning, said, are we okay? We ended in a very different place. Are we okay? I'm fine. And if there's anything else we need to say to get things clear, asking the next question. And it's something, honestly, because it's been tied up with my ego and my identity for a long time, I haven't asked the question. And I've found that emulating the practices of best leaders, you ask that question. Yeah. And you truly want to listen to the answer.
Do you feel closer because you opened up that world of conversation, or you're like, I wish I would have kept that closed?
It's hard to put the genie back in the bottle, isn't it? For me, I haven't shared this part with him yet because I want to do it face to face. In the past, we would have a brown adult drink. It felt as though we could say anything to the other one because the other one was listening and not trying to sell or convince the other person. Mm-hmm. Huge difference. Mm-hmm. Last night felt like he was trying to sell me on a couple of ideas. And we're out of practice. So I'm going to have that conversation with him and said, loved it, man. Let's get it all out on the table and recognize that if we can do this in a respectful way without feeling the need to, as they say, tell, sell, or persuade. Yeah. And we can just do it as a learning opportunity. We could talk anything. We really could talk. And it's funny. I've heard people say that about me, and I don't think it's always true. When I can be part of conversations like that, we can literally talk about anything. We could make anything up. We could figure out Middle East peace without dropping bombs on people. But it takes real powerful listening, very respectful listening, honoring, frankly.
Wow. So this idea of performing comes up as well, specifically performing competence, kind of what you're talking about right now. You want to be very certain and you want to come off as intellectual, especially in these higher up positions. And in a way that seems to increase the isolation people are feeling. And, it's almost like a mask someone's wearing all the time and they can't take it off because it's part of their position. And I'm curious if that's something you've seen in your work. And then what does that cost leaders?
Separating one's ego from one's identity. Getting clear on who you are without the role is a central part of really good executive coaching. It's not just pull this lever and these people will be more engaged. It's not mechanical and it's not 10 steps to health. But really, a lot of it involves around that separation of ego and identity. When people are clear on they are not what they do, but who they are, that makes having some of these conversations an awful lot easier and a lot more meaningful. And it takes work to get to that point that I am not my job. I'm not my title. I'm not my stock options. Those are things I created. I should not be ashamed of them. I've worked hard for them. But at the end of the day, that's not who I am. And this is where we get to the basic notion that I've been preaching for 25 years. Leadership is about doing and being. It's about what you do, but it's also about how you show up. And to be able to separate those two things sometimes is a really, really important thing. Without it, many times we're lost.
Is there a moment that people start to recognize that in themselves that you've seen? Or has there been a pattern in your coaching where you're like, okay, they're finally starting to realize that they need to separate these?
We'll be right back.
Most high performers don't need more ambition or vision. They need better support infrastructure and daily practices to hold it. Wholeness at Work offers leaders real tools for meaningful growth, lifelong impact, and sustained performance. Explore our holistic tools, insights, and practices for working in a way that actually feels like you. Visit ourwholenessatwork.com. Another dirty little secret of coaching. One of the highest predictors of success in a leader's growing is failure.
Wow.
And it is, tell me about a time where you wanted something desperately and you failed. So we can unhook the doing and being pieces of it a little bit. When people realize that they are not that failure. Now, they may have contributed to it, and as long as they're learning from it and they didn't, whatever. I was going to say, cause a nuclear meltdown somewhere, which invites a different conversation. But assuming that people went into a situation with full intent, full effort, their full capabilities, and they failed, sometimes those are in our control and sometimes they're not. But failure is an important aspect of the humility needed to open to new ideas and learn and grow. Honestly, that's what makes coaching physician leaders so challenging sometimes, because they relate to that word failure in the way of life and death.
Yeah.
If I have failed as a clinician, I've really caused bodily harm to someone, or it's certainly not helped them. So kind of disabusing of that notion, there are, failures in a non-clinical sense that are super valuable. But many physicians, the ones we work with are so esteemed and so capable, they've not really experienced any failure. And then one day, their spouse decides to leave them. And then one day, blah, 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 fill in the blanks. And then they know how that feels and the requirement to kind of open up and deal with it.
I have a few questions on this. It's really fascinating, but the first thing would be, I've known you now for a few years. I can't imagine you failed. I just look at you, I see this beautiful view in your office looking at Montana, and you have a beautiful family and you've grown a business. And so it sometimes feels like there are people that don't fail. And so I'm curious, have you, and is there a story that is shareable from you in failing?
It was right after 9/11 when the world was going to hell in a handbasket and we didn't really know what the future was, and our sense of security in the United States was shaken to its core. I went inside. I took an internal job in a health system because a friend of mine was named CEO and he asked me to come over. And I went in as the CHRO, Chief Human Resources Officer. I knew the human resource and human capital fields really well. Didn't know the mechanics of how you run a human resource department of thousands of people, especially in a healthcare environment that everything you do is going to be scrutinized. Your certification as a capable healthcare organization is going to depend upon how well you've record kept. Jana, if you are a physician, where are your certifications up to date and current? Have we followed up on them? Do we have copies of logistics? I took this job against the advice of a number of people, but I was really worried about getting on an airplane again and where the consulting industry was going to go. I'd leave my home at 4:45 in the morning to drive up to beat the traffic. I'd get into the office before anybody else was. I would try and figure out how we were going to tackle this beast. And the accreditation body, Joint Commission, announced just shortly after I got there that they were going to do an audit in 6 months. Now, generally in the hospital, you prepare for 2 or 3 years. The minute they leave the previous time, you start preparing. No preparation had been done. It was a mess. And so we kind of jumped in full speed every waking moment to prepare for Joint Commission, get files together, get all of our documentation together, and just killed it. Killed it. We got in the top 1% for HR practices for all of their organizations they were surveying that year. That said, the rest of the HR function did not do well. I mean, not according to Joint Commission, but I'm not certain we were serving the needs of the people in those hospitals at that time. Mm-hmm. We were so focused. And so I was burnt out. It took me a year. I was, 16 hours a day at work and working 7 days a week and gained a ton of weight and was really unhealthy. And at some point I just said, I can't do this. Working for an organization that I don't really feel aligned with, they're just about making more money and I'm not. And so I left after a year. Yeah, I would say that was a pretty clear failure experience. I did not, if you looked at the metrics of what makes an effective HR department, I hit one of them out of the park. I mean, killed one while ignoring others.
I think that's so relatable as an entrepreneur. I have a very small business, but I'm trying to grow it. I've had it for 10 years now. And oh my goodness, the times I've been like, should I take that job? I mean, it would be nice to have the security.
Oh, do it.
But there is it's for me fear-based. Well, my work's going great now, but anything can happen. Someone can invent AI and it can take over my entire job within a year. I'll find out.
Question. Yep.
So, I really appreciate you sharing that story because I think for a lot of people building something, that is kind of always on your shoulder. Well, I could apply for the job. I could reach out to my old contacts. And sometimes that's not the path you're supposed to be on. And it's hard to listen to that too.
Failure happens. And the cliche is that the strongest tissue in the human body is scar tissue. Mm-hmm. So after we've been hurt, the rebuilding of that, according to Joseph Campbell and his work on mythology, after that failure or hurt, it is the process of recovery and renewal that really makes us who we are and makes us better. And so failure does have a very important relationship with leadership effectiveness. And it doesn't mean that you go out and try and fail all the time. In the 80s, there was a management theorist named, I believe it was Richard Sloma, who wrote a book called No Nonsense Management. And he differentiated reversible decisions versus irreversible decisions. If you're helping a young leader grow, give them some reversible decisions, things that if they decide one way and it goes south, they can always pull it back from the fire. You don't give them the irreversible ones, the ones that are permanent. We all have to try them and we all have to fail. And just that's part of the deal. I'll make one more story about this. The military, I speak to the U.S. Army, is famous for, and I believe they all branches of the service do it, is famous for their after-action reviews. And it is without punishment, without shame. It is, okay, let's replay what just happened. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you saw the enemy here. You guys responded over here. What led you to that conclusion? Okay, was it the most effective one or not? Okay, it worked in these. Okay, now, great. What were your other alternatives at the time? Like, let's look it through. Not like failure, shame, failure, but let's do an after-action review to figure out what really happened, to think about your thought process so that you can learn and grow for the next time.
Yeah.
And they're fabulous at doing that, and I wish businesses did that more regularly and better.
How fascinating. Why don't you think they do that more regularly and better if we have proof that it works?
Yeah, because we're on to the next thing. I know in FMG, we've always wanted to do that. And we do it occasionally, but it's more sporadic, maybe more routine now, but it's been more sporadic. And it's like, yeah, let's take an hour and debrief what just happened. Yeah, no, I've got my schedules back to back and I'm going on the road to Louisville next week. And then, I'm in Memphis the week after. We don't have time for it. Let's schedule it out a month. Okay, we schedule it out a month and then the urgency is gone. People have forgotten what they experienced in the moment and the learning is past. We're just too freaking busy. Now, could we build that into a project plan and says at the conclusion of everything, here's a half a day and we're going to throw everything up on a whiteboard and figure it out? We could absolutely do that. We could absolutely do it. We just don't. We're too busy moving.
Yeah, how fascinating. I think when you were talking about that, things that came up for me were elite athletes reviewing tape or, creatives or actors reviewing tape to do things better. And you do see people at the top of their game. That's typically a piece of the routine.
One of my dear colleagues, Chris Mitchell, speaks in terms of that when he coaches. And he talks about any source of feedback as reviewing tape. He's a big New England Patriots fan. And let's go watch film together. Let's watch film. Let's take a look at what you just did. We have sources of feedback here. Now let's just, no judgment, but we're going to go watch film. Fabulous. It's super powerful.
Have you ever reviewed film with your athletes you work with?
No, I don't do that because I'm not involved with them from a technical standpoint. What I do is to say, okay, you're standing on a balance beam or you're standing down at the end of the runway for the vault. What's going through your head? What are you thinking? So we kind of review tape that way. I worked with an athlete one time that was so mentally blocked in gymnastics that she would run down the runway to the vault and she would freeze and run into the end of the horse. But she was so panicked, like locked up in that moment. And just kind of get her to think about and create new associations with what she's feeling in that moment to more success was our work together. And it worked. She didn't do that after we started working, but it's a journey.
Yeah.
But it all starts with much more feedback, whether you're watching tape or you're kind of thinking about those cues in the moment.
Something else that surprised me when reading about loneliness, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, but it's that younger people report loneliness more frequently, but older people are hit harder when it lands, so maybe feel it more impactfully. I keep thinking about what that means inside of an organization where you might have, a late 20s drowning in this feeling, and then someone who is in their 50s or something, experiencing the same version of that thing. So what do you make of that? Is there a way to close that gap?
There would not be a gap if we could all recognize and value the importance of those feelings. In my generation, we denied them even though we might have felt them or recognized them. Remember, we came from a generation that were trained by our parents through the Depression. And, you put on your corporate hat at the front door and you put your own hat down, or you put on the company uniform, so to speak, when you walk in the door. They don't want to know if you're having a bad day. They don't want to know if you're feeling a certain way. Keep that out. Go do your job. And younger generations don't have that same burden, for better or worse. They are much more likely to be honest and candid with what they are feeling. Some old timers in my generation will make that wrong, will deride that like, oh, well, it's all about their feelings all the time, which it's really not, I don't think. But they're much more fluent in that language that says, I want, I need. And so some people, again, my generation, have labeled that as self-indulgent and entitled and stuff like that. They're just better at it than we are. And so my wonderful mantra is, what if they're not wrong? And that was the first stimulus to the next book. Sitting at a dinner party, listening to a story of a person in my generation judge somebody from a younger generation for stating what they wanted, which was to go watch a kid's soccer game for 2 hours in an afternoon. That absolutely would not have affected their job, but nobody had ever done it before. And I finally said, what if they're not wrong? Have we gotten it right? Like, we come from a place of superiority because we were standing on our work ethic and our attitude as if it's everything. Well, it may not be. What if they're not wrong? So if we could all get to the point where we acknowledge the value of feelings, being in touch with our own, sharing the ones that help connect us with people, there wouldn't be a gap.
Do you think younger generations being willing to talk about it creates an opportunity in the leadership culture that hasn't been there before? Or do you think it's just a difference in how we were raised and therefore it's just always going to be something that's different?
I'll say, I think the better organizations have always created space for this. An organization that I respect a great deal, Deloitte, largest privately held professional services firm in the world, 10, 15 years ago, started realizing that their model for producing results, which is hire young people, have them work their butts off for 7 years, 90-hour weeks on the road all the time, and then, supporting the high-paid senior partners who would, dip into 10 projects, but they'd be able to do their thing. It wasn't sustainable for this kind of generation of people. So they made dramatic changes to find better ways to listen, better ways to engage, better ways to honor health. And in fact, Deloitte was the very first large professional services organization to have a chief wellness officer. Their first chief wellness officer was somebody I know very, very well, Jen Fisher, who wrote a best-selling book. She talks about her experiences trying to recover from being a compulsive performer in an organization that would just keep asking for more and more and more and more and more. And it burned her out. And she was working 19 hours a day and loving it and getting all the kudos and moving up the chain and all that kind of stuff. Deloitte made a dramatic shift. And that wasn't easy for them to do because, again, it affected their financial model, how they price projects and think about projects and make money from projects and stuff like that. Huge, huge, huge benefit.
Wow. Yeah, and Jen was in the first season of Stepwise and talks a little bit about that. I thought she was such a fascinating guest. And talks a little bit about that shift in Deloitte as well. Is there a version of leadership loneliness that you've experienced but haven't talked about publicly that you'd be willing to share?
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that, Jana, but, in my little journey inside our little firm of 50 people, as I aged, we moved to Montana at 60, when I was 60 years old. And there were things about the last 2 years of us living where we lived before and then moving to Montana, getting farther away from our home office, shifting out of the roles that I had done forever. There are parts of that I felt like there's nobody inside that I could really talk to. And so it didn't feel like crippling depression, but it was clear I was going through some stuff psychologically that represented a new phase of my life. And, my partner, I love him dearly, and he's really good at what he does. He's 20 years my junior, so there's some part of that experience he couldn't relate to. Okay, my identity and role and all that are a little bit different. And, he's coached other CEOs on this, but this was me.
Yeah.
So I needed help. I wanted help. And so, engaged a therapist I'd worked with for years before we moved at various stages of transition in my life, to have that safe place to talk about, God, I'm feeling these things. Am I nuts? How should I reframe this? That kind of thing. And so, I sought help, but there were some really important pieces of my life that were not easily or probably properly discussed at work.
Mm. Did you find anything out about yourself in that transition?
Boy, a ton. And again, it's separating these tentacles of ego and identity and role and all that stuff and pulling it apart. It's like a three-legged stool for me now, like my true identity, who I really am. And then this notion about ego and accomplishment could be kind of over here. And that sense about how I show up over here. And so being able to untangle those things so that you can take a look at them from a distance and go, yeah, okay, oh boy, look at that. Your identity says you've got to be blah, blah, blah. Is that true? And so it gave me an opportunity to take a look at some beliefs that I've been holding to see whether or not they were true. This is a story I tell all the time, but am I dependent if our leadership team meets on extension 101, mine, or 102, Matt's? Shifting just that little simple thing like, Foster, you're not leading those meetings anymore. It was 2017. You're not CEO. Wait, it's not on my extension anymore?
Interesting.
I'm not the guy? That took a bit. Now, to his credit, Matt and I have handled that transition, I think, really well, but it's taken a while.
That sounds like such a good story to hear even more about. You shared a little bit about that transition in season 2 of Stepwise with Matt and how you both worked through that together. And it sounded like such a healthy sort of way to go through a transition where someone decided, hey, it's your turn now. And then the other person, you worked through it together and kind of got through that phase. And is that what you usually are coaching CEOs to do or leaders to do on their own?
Unfortunately, we get called in months after that work should have been done, and we get called into founder transitions or CEO transitions that are not being handled well.
Interesting.
So we get called in when the heat is really high.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas had they started a little bit before and done their own work and had some deep conversations and gotten real and blah, 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 seen their own version of a counselor, whether it's an executive coach or a therapist, a lot of it could have been avoided. Intelligence, drive, and values for me were the three things. Once I felt very comfortable with Matt about that, we took a 5-year process and we started transitioning him in over a course of 5 years. But each year, he would learn and take on responsibility for a different part of the firm's operations. You run finance this year. Next year, you're going to run ops. You own that for a year. So go for it. And then the next year was strategy. So we did this over the course of 5 years with 5 different topics. So by the time I'm ready to step out, he's very, very able. He's always been able, but more experienced and capable and knows who we are, that he can take over leading. Very few people do that. Now, there's a lot of politics involved. I have conversations with CEOs all the time and said, that person is my heir apparent, but I can't tell her or I can't tell him because then they want more money and they, whatever it is. A lot of good reasons, and I don't mean to disparage that, but in our case, it was deliberate and it was over time. We took our time to do it well. And it was seamless, absolutely seamless.
Wow.
And when we tell founders and all that kind of stuff, the story now, they go, oh, well, I wouldn't work here. But we get called in, honest to God, all the time. Especially, we focus a lot on investor-backed healthcare. What does that mean? Private equity buying a surgical company. And so the private equity company has some money in the game, but they want results.
Mm-hmm.
And the surgical company now has an investor, and several of the people in their executive team have gotten wealthy, but they still need to run an effective organization. And a lot of times when an investor comes in, they'll insist on a leadership transition. So by the time our investor came in for FMG, we had to show that the organization was not dependent upon me because they knew my time there was fairly limited. Well, the same with other investor-backed organizations. And that transition from founder, some cases, or CEO to someone new is so poorly handled so often. It's shocking.
It sounds like you're setting the new person up for failure too by just saying, oh, they're in now and go take it over and run with it, when it's already a stressful position to step into and feel lonely in. So,
I think that's right. And it's based on an assumption that businesses or organizations are perfectly rational things.
mm-hmm.
And they're not.
Yeah.
And they're very, and I don't mean this in the wrong way, but they're very social beings. They're social entities. We have a lot of people with different ideas about things, and it is their interaction with not only their job and the things and the resources, but with each other that's going to make the difference. And if we just say, go to it now, you're this title, go, we're assuming that this is a rational organization. All you really need to do is have a good strategy that is a differentiator in your marketplace, and that you break that into the departments with goals and objectives and stuff, and that you've got the right talent, and everything's going to go take care of itself. It doesn't 100% of the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it just doesn't, because we are social entities. Having the right talent, vital. Having the right strategy, vital. Now, how do we pull this off? We're a human organization. And how do we pull it off sustainably?
Fascinating. Last question. If you're talking to a leader right now who recognizes themselves in what we've said, in the loneliness piece of it all, or in this transition piece, what's one true thing you'd want them to hear?
I think about that on two levels. One is at the organizational level, and one is at the personal level. And both answers are similar, but a little bit different. At the organizational level, I think leaders are really smart these days to lean into the relationships with their people more deeply. That does not mean collude with. If somebody's, a grumpy Gus, and doesn't mean you have to agree with them all the time, but at least find ways to listen to each other. So build into your culture and your organization's practices for allowing deeper conversations to occur. Go out and ask more questions. Make that your environment a safe place for people to really, truly be themselves and be candid. So deeper relationship between leader and follower. Sometimes that requires that we each do our own work to really explore the biases and the judgments we might have about people or about the organization, and explode those, because those are huge boulders that get in the way between people in relationship. On a personal level, it is, maybe I should take men and women. It is often said that women have a lot better and more readily available, emotionally available relationships than men do. So, continue to reach out, and whatever that looks like, a coach, a therapist, a friend group, a book club, all super useful if it allows you to express yourself openly and honestly. And men, join up. I just started a not a men's group here in Bozeman, where every other Tuesday night we sit around a campfire, and the only ground rules really are, what's said here stays here, and try and listen deeply. Don't judge another man. About 3 hours, we just sit and share what's on in our lives, and people reported to me after that, like, wow, that's the first time I've done that, and boy, that was good, and I want to come back and do more. If community is important to you, like it is to me, make something happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be crazy. It can be come over by a bonfire and let's talk for an hour.
Doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah.
To speak a little bit on the women versus men, I saw the report that I believe 54% of men say they are lonely and 56% of women say they're lonely. But men are underreporting because they're likely more afraid to be admitting something like that. So it seems like a pretty even issue amongst everyone. And so starting these little steps, like have everyone meet up at a coffee shop and chat for an hour, can really make a huge difference.
Life's too hard and complicated and fast-paced to forget the fact that we are human animals on this planet who desire and crave and need connection. So if you're not getting it, figure it out. Go get it.
Thank you so much. Fascinating. I really appreciated this conversation.
That's a wrap on today's conversation. If this episode hit close to home, good. That means you're paying attention. Reach out to someone this week. It doesn't have to be complicated. Foster said it best. We are human animals who crave connection. So go out there and get it. Foster and I mentioned a few other episodes from previous seasons in this conversation, which I'll share links to in the show notes. First was with Jen Fisher of Deloitte, the first Chief Wellbeing Officer. And the second from season 2 is his conversation with Matt Brubaker. I encourage you to listen to both and explore our past episodes because there's so much wisdom in them. And as Foster always says, set the table, invite cool people, magic happens. Thank you for listening to Stepwise.
If this conversation was worth your time, and I hope it was, do one thing for me before you close the app. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It takes 60 seconds. It's how people like you help people like me find this show. And if what we talked about today sparks something in you, good. That's the whole point. There's a book called Leadership, Rethinking the True Path to Great Leading. Yes, that's the real title that goes deeper into this territory. It's on my website at fostermobley.com. Check it out. And then sign up for our email list to be notified when my next book, Honoring, goes into pre-sale in 2027. And if there's one person in your life who needed to hear this episode, send it to them. Not because we need the numbers, because they need the conversation. Set the table, invite cool people, magic happens. I'm Foster Mobley. As always, friends, stepwise. Our music for Season 3 is composed and performed by Montana musical legend Philip Alberg, courtesy of Sweetgrass Music. Phil's recent passing was felt by many, including those of us associated with this podcast. If you're not familiar with Phil's Grammy-nominated music, do yourself a favor and follow him on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your music. We thank Patty Alberg and Sweetgrass Music for access to this beautiful piece.
Thank you for listening to Stepwise. Stepwise is produced, edited, and promoted by Zedist with support from Amber Gillard Consulting. Find more episodes and resources at fostermobley.com and follow Foster on social media at Foster Mobley. We'll see you next time.